Another argument in support of ethical egoism, the respect the value of the individual argument, goes a little something like this. Premise number 1. If we value the individual, that is, if the individual has moral worth, then we must agree that the individual life is of supreme importance to the individual. Premise number 2 says the ethics of altruism regards the life of the individual as something one must be ready to sacrifice for the good of others. Premise number 3 says ethical egoism, which allows each person to view his or her own life as being of ultimate value, powerfully asserts the value of the individual. Thus, ethical egoism is the philosophy we ought to accept. It seems like premises number 1 and 3 could be argued are true. Premise number 1 asserts that if an individual is to be said to have moral worth, or that value, can reside on that person's usefulness to others, because that turns the person into a tool. And therefore, it's not that they have inherent moral worth, it's that they have instrumental value to others. And that's not really valuing the individual at all. Okay, so premise number 1 seems like we could make a pretty good case for that. Premise number 3 just kind of reasserts the principles of ethical egoism and claims that these principles powerfully assert the value of the individual. But premise number 2 might have some challenges that it faces, okay? The ethics of altruism regards the life of the individual as something one must be ready to sacrifice for the good of others. Really? Always? Maybe it would be helpful here to make a distinction between weak altruism and strong altruism. Okay, strong altruism would say that yes, the needs, the concerns, the best interests of others always come before your own. Your interests are always secondary to those of others. On the other hand, we might have what's called a weak altruism. And a weak altruism would say, well, sometimes the needs of others rightfully come before mine, and sometimes they don't. So if I'm walking down the street eating my sandwich for lunch, and some guy comes up to me and says, hey, I want that sandwich, do I really, to be a good person, do I have to say, okay, here you go, your needs come before mine, take my sandwich because your hunger matters more than mine? And we'd say, well, no. Somebody demands something from you and claims to have, that it's in their best interest to have it. It doesn't seem fair to say that you're always required to put the needs of others in front of your own. So strong altruism is probably an unviable principle. But weak altruism would say that, well, sometimes you rightfully should put the needs and concerns and interests of others over your own. So that if you're walking down the street and you're eating your lunch and you see somebody who's getting ready to go into a diabetic coma, that's not a good example because they probably wouldn't be able to chew. If you see somebody who's obviously really malnourished, really hungry, it might be in your best interest to put their needs above yours, because comparatively, your best interests are a little different here. Your best interest is to have a lunch so that you feel satiated for the rest of the day. Their best interest is to not die, okay? And so we might be able to say that it's not the case that the ethics of altruism requires that we always, without fail, put others' needs above ours. Maybe there's a such thing as a weak altruism. And if that's the case, then it's not the case that we should necessarily accept ethical egoism as our philosophy, because we're not always going to identify the action that advances our own best interests as the action we should take.